guys like that little transition sequence you just saw, I'm gonna show you exactly how I got those shots and how I edit it in Final Cut Pro. The cool thing about this is that those are all in camera, so the amount of post-production work you have to do is very minimum. I've made a lot of transitions in the past with keyframes and masks, and although those are really cool, they take a lot of time. So I wanted to keep this one simple and show you guys how to do this stuff in camera, because it really does take your videos to the next level if they're done right. If you want me to show you how I made some of those other transitions with the keyframes and the masks, just let me know in the comment section and I'll make a video on how I did it. I'm using the Sony ZV-1 because it's small and it delivers a great quality image, but you can use any camera you have, whether it's a smartphone or a DSLR, preferably something that has stabilization. The picture profile I was using was Cine 2, and I set my exposure compensation to 0.3. If you have no idea what a picture profile is, I made a video about them, and I'll leave that in the description below so you can catch up on that assignment. I used every in-camera transition I could think of. There are probably more that I could have used, but it would have taken more post-production work, and for this one, I just wanted to keep it simple. I used a wipe, a whip left, fill the frame, a whip up, a spin, and a vertical wipe. The big thing to remember when you intend to use transitions in your videos is to plan your shot. Whatever you exit one shot with, you have to enter the next shot with. So if I whip left out of one shot, I'll have to remember that on the next shot, I'm gonna whip left in. Another thing to remember is framing. If I have my camera set up like this on one shot, I don't wanna turn it like this on the next shot. Sometimes it gets confusing because you think that you're moving in the same direction or the same motion, that you can turn it like this, but it becomes disorienting and it really does break up the flow. Movement. Make sure that you always move in the same direction as your first shot. If I move my camera in one movement, I want to remember that on the next shot, my camera has to continue in that same movement because you don't want to break up the flow. I don't want to shoot like this and then on the next scene show a car moving to the left, because it makes your viewer go like that and it just feels disorienting. So you always want it to have a nice flow. The purpose of transitions is really to be subtle to the point where you almost don't even notice them. So remember that going into it. You don't want to have a ton of crazy transitions because it could become dizzying for your viewer. Stabilization. It's pretty important to have stabilization when you're trying to achieve some of these shots because a lot of them have to be done handheld because of the quick movements. And if you don't have stabilization in your camera, you're going to go home and find that you have a bunch of unusable footage because it's just too shaky to use. Now, I shot most of these shots handheld, but I did pull out the gimbal for a few of them. One thing to always remember when you're using transitions is to walk at the same pace between both shots so that you have the same pace and the movement stays the same. So don't like walk really fast with one shot and then walk slower with the next shot because it just doesn't match up. So for that opening shot, I used a tree as my white barrier, and I had to find something that had similar color and similar texture so that when I entered into my next shot, it looked seamless. I found this tree in this park which had a very similar color and texture, so that's what I went with. I also liked what it was revealing, this nice little foresty area with sun shining through and butterflies, so I figured it would be the perfect way to transition in. This is how I shot it. So I ended up using a whip left on the exit of that shot, so I'll have to remember that. Upon entering the next shot, I'll also have to do a whip left. Let's go get the next shot. You may have remembered this from the cinematic B-roll video where we attached a selfie stick to the ZV-1 and then we dangled it upside down so that we could get a really cool angle. Now the way we exited out of our last shot was a whip left, so we have to continue that motion moving to the left. So I dangled the selfie stick to my left side and then I just kind of tracked it around to where it hit my pant leg. So this is how I got that shot. Now, be careful with that type of transition. You don't ever want to kick your camera off of the selfie stick by accident. You can really fill the frame with anything, any color, any texture, doesn't really matter as long as you fill the frame. And you remember on the next one what that color was so that when you back away, it looks like it's a seamless transition. Let's go get the next shot. So I found this tree in the park, and the one thing that I like about it is when you look up from the ground through the branches, you can see the sky and it just looks really cool. So I thought it would be a good way to exit out of our fill the frame shot and enter into our next shot. So the one thing that I'm gonna do is make sure that I'm manually focused and manually exposed. So I'm going to pick a part of the shot that I like the most and then make sure I'm focused on that and then also exposed for that. So in this case, it's the branches. I'm gonna go ahead and let the autofocus take care of that, and then I'll switch it over to manual focus. Now I'm gonna make sure that my exposure is set to plus 0.3 because we're shooting in Cine 2. I'm gonna go ahead and fill the frame with like the black color from the last shot, which was my pants. It had that black frame, and I'm just gonna dolly back. Now I'm gonna whip up to exit this shot. All right, let's go get the next shot. Transitions are like a game of memory. You have to remember what you did on the shot before so that you can do the same movement and have the same frame as the next shot. You also can think of it as like a game of chess because you have to think ahead of what you're doing. I almost have to think backwards. If I want to get this shot, well, I'm gonna get this shot first and I'm gonna get that shot before that one. But once you start getting into that habit, it makes your workflow so much faster and easier because in-camera transitions are so much easier to do than actually doing transitions in post. And it looks more natural. So I put myself into a little bit of a pickle with this one. When I whipped up from the last tree, I realized afterwards that there's not really much that you can whip up into, but I did see these branches above me and I saw some sun shining through. So I found some sunspots and I thought it would be a cool way to kind of transition from the tree shot to the next shot. So this would be considered almost like a bridge. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to expose manually and focus manually, pretty much the same way that I did on the tree so that both clips have the same color science and they match up good. So I'm gonna go here. Another thing to mention is that I'm shooting in 60 frames per second. One, because it allows me to use the active steady shot stabilization within the ZV-1, but also because it allows me to slow down in post 40%, which makes my footage a little bit smoother and also has a little bit more flexibility than if I was to shoot in 24 frames per second. Let's go to the next shot. So because I ended my last shot with the camera spinning, I'm gonna start this shot with the camera spinning in the same direction as the camera was spinning in the last shot. I'm also gonna make sure that my camera is upside down so that when I spin it, it ends right side up. So I saw this little garden-ish area off to my left, and this branch will serve as the perfect barrier for when I do a vertical wipe. So what I wanna do is manually expose my camera so that it's at the same settings as it was on the last scene so that they can mix together. So I go ahead and focus and expose for plus 0.3. Set my manual focus, flip it upside down, hit record. All right, let's go get the next shot. So now that we ended our last shot with a vertical wipe, we're gonna continue that motion. I saw this bench over here and it has some gaps in between its backboards, so I thought it would be a great way to give it some detail and some definition so that when we're moving up, we can quickly switch between clips and you won't even notice the difference. A couple things to remember is that I wanna have a nice background so that when I'm at the top of the bench, what is revealed, in this case, it's the intercoastal. I also wanna make sure that my camera is level. Now we're gonna use the same principles as we did before. We're gonna make sure that we're manually focused on the background and manually exposed for the background so that we don't have any pumping of the focus or the exposure on the way up of the bench. Let's go shoot. I'm going to manually expose so that I'm at plus 0.3 because we're shooting in Cine 2. And I'm going to focus on the background, change it over to manual focus, and now we're set, ready to go. So remember that transitions are supposed to be subtle. You're almost not even supposed to notice them. They're supposed to help add to the story. You don't want to make people dizzy, and you don't want to let transitions take over your video, because then it could become disorienting. Not only that, but you don't want your viewer to get lost in the story. I've seen videos before, in fact, I've made videos that were too transition heavy, and then my storyline just fell apart. With that being said, I've made all of these video clips available for download, and I left a link in the description so that you can download them as you follow along. The challenge for this week is for you to download these clips, play around with it, give it your own twist, make a little transition cinematic sequence, and then post it to YouTube. Then add the link to the comment section underneath this video so that we can all take a look and tell you what we think. Now I'm going to show you how I edit this video in Final Cut Pro. Here we are in Final Cut Pro. We're going to run through these clips really quick before we start to do our little editing polish to them. So as you can see, when they're bumped up next to each other, it doesn't look that good. You can clearly tell a difference between the two clips. Once we trim these up, they'll start to look more seamless. And another thing to think about is a lot of these are pretty shaky, so we're gonna have to throw some stabilization on them. Now, we're not going to color correct at all until we get to the end of the video, because we wanna make sure that all of the footage that we have for this sequence is usable first. We don't wanna waste any time color correcting and then get to the end of it and have a video clip that's too shaky, or it's out of frame, or it's out of focus, and then you just have to go back and find another clip. So we save that to the end. So for this shot, I actually threw it up on a gimbal because I wanted that really smooth, steady shot, and I wanted to throw the gimbal into Vertigo Mode, which gives it that 180-degree spin without any jitters. All right, for this shot. Now for this shot, I actually shot it backwards by accident. When I was shooting this tree, two police officers walked up to me and they were like wondering what I was doing, and I tried to explain to them that I was making a YouTube video, and they kind of looked at me funny. But after they left, I was all out of sorts, and so I just recorded it backwards. But that's okay because I can reverse it in post. Let me show you how to do that. So all you do is you click on this clip, you come up to this little clock, you click on reverse clip, and now they will match up perfectly. So, and then finally the pedestal up, which is how we finished out the video. So the first thing that I always do is I go to the front of the timeline. I'll zoom in by pressing Command plus, and I'll start by trimming my clips. So I'm going to trim it when the bark of the tree fully covers the entire frame. So I'd say like right about there. So I'm going to come and trim it up. Same thing with this next tree. Now for this tree, this shot, there's a couple of different movements. I start to move towards the tree before I start to track left. So I want to catch this clip once it has a solid momentum, and it's right about here. So I'm going to go ahead and trim the clip right to there. Now, if you looked at these two clips together, it doesn't really look like they match up well. So what we're going to need to do is add some speed ramps to both of them. So I'm going to click on this clip. I'm going to wait till it gets right about there. Go ahead and zoom in a little more. I might even extend it out a little bit more so we have a little bit more to play with. And I'm going to go ahead and press Shift B, making sure that my playhead is right about there to give the clip enough room to have a speed ramp. Whereas if I did it here, you'd barely even tell the speed ramp. If I did it over here, there would probably be too much of a speed ramp. So I'm thinking that in this vicinity is good. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up by 800%. And I'm going to do the same thing with this tree. So I'd say maybe like right about here. Go ahead and press Shift B. Speed it up by 800%. Now we'll see if these two clips match up better. Looks pretty good. Now I do see a little bump. So by pressing the right arrow key, I can move frame by frame. And I'm not liking that bump. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this clip. I'm going to click on the keyframe of scale, and I'm going to bring it in to where we don't see any of that daylight. Then I'm going to come to the end of the clip, Command minus to zoom out, come to the end of the clip. Right before we start to do the whip left, right about here, I'm going to come back to the scale and bring it down to 100%. So there's a little bit of a zoom effect for this shot. So we're gonna go ahead and see what it looks like. Okay, so that's starting to look good, but I do notice a little bit of shake right in this area. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click right here, click on the normal. As soon as the bounding box is around the green area, I'm gonna go to the little clock, go to automatic speed. Because we shot this in 60 frames per second, it automatically slows it down to 40%. So now we're gonna have a nice, slow and smooth piece of footage from the speed ramp. So this is what it'll look like. I think just like that. And then we see the little leaf falling right here. So that's where I'll probably speed it back up. Right there. So now I'm gonna press Shift B. Zoom out, Command minus, and so it's not too sudden of a change. I will just take it to about 80%. So I'm just gonna bring it like this, 80%, and we'll see what that looks like. There you go. So it kind of smooths it out a little bit better without having to use the stabilization feature right here. Sometimes when you use this, it kind of morphs your video. So I always try to avoid using it. Sometimes you can't avoid using it, but in this case I was able to get away with just using speed ramps and then also slowing down my footage a little bit before speeding it back up to give it that nice smooth look. Okay, so that's looking good. So now we're going to go to the end of this clip right here, press Shift B, which I've already done, and I'm going to just make this normal or a little bit fast. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I want that whip left to have more of a natural feel. If I'm slowing it down to 80%, you might be able to tell. So this is what it'll look like. And so now we want to drop into this shoe clip right as it's panning left. So in this case, I'd say right about there. So I'm gonna go ahead and option left bracket to trim it up. Then I'm going to bring it forward to say maybe right here. And this is all subjective. You can do it however you want. I'm just doing it how I can remember best I did it, and also what looks the best in my opinion. Go ahead and press Shift B. I'm gonna bring it down. Let's speed it up to 400%. So this is what it looks like. I think that looks pretty good. Now for this clip, I was supposed to hit the camera lens with my pant leg, but unfortunately I missed it. I was never really good at soccer. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna trim it where I need it to, right about there. That's supposed to fill the frame. But if you look at the difference between this frame and this frame, which is the bark of the tree, completely different. So one of the most used tricks that I have that I use in Final Cut Pro all the time is I'll take a screenshot of a black background or a white background, and then I'll take it, I'll drag it in to wherever I need it. I hit Option right bracket. I'll drag my playhead over maybe say 3 frames, click on the clip, come up to opacity, click a keyframe on it, bring the clip to the end, and then I'll bring it down to where it starts to match the bark, which I'd say right about there is pretty good to make it look like my pant leg did hit it. So it would look like this. There we go. So now we need to get this bark right. So we're going to move the playhead until we start to see movement right about there. So this is what they look like back to back. Okay, perfect. The first thing that I noticed with this tree shot is it just seems like it's too long. So we want to speed it up. So I'm just going to click on the entire clip, speed it up 2 times. So it's at 200%. Then once we start getting to the place where we were exposed for and also focused on, which is kind of like the fork in the tree or the branches looking through the clouds, that's when we'll slow it back down. So right about there I think is about good. I'll go ahead and press Shift B. I'm gonna go ahead and click normal. So now we're a little fast on the first portion of it, and then it starts to slow down to normal. And then I'm going to trim it up right as we see most of the sky. So right there. So now that we've sped it up, I am noticing that it's a little bit more shaky than I'd like it to be, and even this normal portion is a little shaky. So in this case, we're going to use the stabilization. on stabilization, and it definitely punches in, but it's okay. It's somewhat artistic. We still see the sun shining through the tree and then right up to the branches. So I'm going to come to maybe say right about here. I'm gonna go ahead and Shift B to give it a speed ramp 4 times. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We got those 2 clips matched up well. I don't think I'm gonna speed up or slow down this shot. As soon as it starts to spin right there, I'm going to speed it up by 2000. So using the arrow key, find that frame right there. I'm gonna Shift B, speed it up by 2000%. And then once we're about here, I'm going to trim the clip right there. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, good. So it's looking good now. We can always come back and give ourselves more room to play with if we need. But for now, let's move on to this clip. So because I was using the gimbal on this shot, with the police officers right behind me wondering what I was doing, we're going to speed it up to 2000 till we get to about right here. Shift B, reverse fast, 2000%. Then once we get to here, we're going to speed it up by 800%. So we're incrementally speeding it up slower and slower, if that makes any sense. And then right there, right when it gets to that flat horizontal stopping point, we will speed this up by 400%. It's kind of like a ladder. So we'll see what happens here. That's a little bit too fast. So we're going to click on that, and then we're just going to move it over until we start to feel that smooth. That looks pretty good. Just like that. So now we're coming up pretty fast, so I'm going to slow this down to say 80%. And then once we start that climb here, I'll speed it up a little bit faster. So Shift B, and we'll go back to say normal. And then once we get to about, I like this texture area right around here, that's where we're going to trim it out. So now we're exiting out of this shot into the pedestal of the bench. I'm gonna make this go a little bit faster. And we're going to find the spot where we start to go up on the bench. So let's say probably right here, we want to fill the frame out. Option left bracket. And then we're going to speed it up right there, Shift B. And let's go 8 times fast. Let's see what that looks like. Looks pretty good. So the final thing that we're going to do is give it a slow fade out. So we're going to click on a keyframe for opacity right here when it's at 100%, come to the end of the clip, and then bring that opacity down to 0 so it looks somewhat like this. All right, so now we are finished up. We'll watch it one time through, make sure all of our transitions look good. Is that? Come to the end. Looking pretty good. We speed up right to the bench. So that's pretty much it. Then I'll go through clip by clip and color grade them so that they are matching up when they are back to back. So just for an example, I'll color grade this clip really fast so you can see how easy it is to do. I go here to the color palette, click on color wheels. I press Command 7 to pull up my waveforms. Start with the shadows and bring them down to 0 right here. Then I come up to the highlights and bring up the highlights to about 100, 106. And then of course saturation. Then I'll press Command 7 again to take a look at it and give it my own little tweak. So that's how I color grade it, and then you just go through each one by one to make sure that they all look the same. And once you're done with that, you have a pretty good transition. To make sure you utilize all of your speed ramps correctly, and always try to keep your momentum the same. So if this video helped you better understand how to get in-camera transitions, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm Joe with Potter Made, and let's grow as we go. Peace. For the wipe, so that when I wiped across, I would clear the frame completely. And